Welcome to another Bible Truth broadcast. I'm Evangelist Tom Gillum. I'm an itinerant evangelist, believes in expositional preaching. I like to do it line upon line, precept upon precept. I like to do it in a series form. I like to do it with enthusiasm. It's a joy today to have you on the broadcast. Do not take your presence here for granted. Do not take it lightly, but count it a great honor to have you here. Hope you'll have a Bible handy, a notebook, something to write with. Find our text today in the book of Hebrews, chapter number 13. We have now for some time been preaching a series of messages from this verse here. We hope to conclude these messages either on this broadcast or the next. And we look forward to starting a new series on looking at 6 of the wilderness songs and preaching on the subject, My Lord Knows the Way Through the Wilderness. But for today, we look in Hebrews 13:7 once again, where the Hebrew writer says, Remember them which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God. The writer of Hebrews asks us to call to remembrance from the distant past, not the immediate past, those who have brought the word of God to us. He said, whose faith follow. He said, find out what kind of faith they had, what kind of belief system they had, what kind of doctrinal foundation they had, and seek to mimic that or follow that. He said, considering the end of their conversation. He said, find out how they concluded, cross the finish line, and seek to do likewise. So we have now in a number of broadcasts been preaching on the subject, is there any among us like these? We've looked at Jonathan and Sarah Edwards. We've looked at David Brainerd and William Tyndall. Looked at John Patton, the great missionary to the cannibals. William Cowper, the great songwriter. George Mueller, the great preacher of Bristol, England. We looked at Martin Luther, the one who started the Reformation. And for the last couple of broadcasts, we've been looking at Adoniram Judson. He was the first man to leave our country in America and go to Burma, India as a missionary. And we have already looked at the context of his life, at the convictions of his life. And on our last broadcast, we looked at the conversion of his life. You remember that context of his life now was John 12, where a corn seed fall in the ground, it abideth alone unless it die. If it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Adoniram Judson's life was a life of death to self. Even his last words were, how few there are who die so hard. Today I want to begin to look at some concluding thoughts, and I want to bring to our attention the conflicts of his life. Anne, his first wife, he saw her for the first time in June of 1819 and fell in love with her immediately and wrote her father a note requesting her hand in marriage. I was wondering, you that maybe have a daughter, if you received a note like this. He says, I asked, can you part with your daughter early next spring to see her no more in this world, to know she will be subjected to hardship and suffering. She will be exposed to the dangers of the ocean and the heat of India. Can you consent for the sake of him who left his heavenly home to die for her and for you? Can you bear to know that the next time you see her, she will be crowned and robed in righteousness, standing with the heathen, saved through her life? That was his note of request for marriage. Her dad said that he would let her make up her own mind. I thought it was interesting, the note that Anne sent back. She says, I must go only where God's providence shall choose to place me. Oh, is there any among us, a couple like this, that would give so much to get so little of this world's goods? They were married, and a short time later they were upon board a ship headed for Burma, India, for a lifelong battle with cholera and malaria, dysentery, and all the forces of hell itself. It was 6 years in Burma, India, before they ever had a convert. One of their house servants by the name of Mao Non. It was during this time when he had no fruit that he translated the Bible from Latin into Greek and Hebrew and into the Burmese language. At the end of this 6 years, right after this first conversion, Adoniram Judson was arrested and accused of being a spy. It was shortly after his arrest that Anne gave birth to their first son, and he was left in the most deplorable prison situations. And they would hang him at night by bamboo attached to his ankles and hang him upside down. There he would be left to sleep the night away. Anne couldn't beg. It was against the law, the Burmese government, for a woman to beg. And she had no milk. Her milk had dried up. And she went to the prison keeper. I thought it was interesting. His name was Scarface, so you can only imagine what he was like. And she went and pleaded for him to let Adoniram come out and beg for milk and money for milk. And he said he would let him out at night if she would come and hang in his place. Oh, the most deplorable situations. I don't know about you. I would lean towards let the Burmese people go to hell before I would subject myself to such a rigorous suffering in order to see but a few come to know him. While he was in prison, they began to ransack Anne's house. They stole all of her jewels, and she was somewhat afraid that they would get the Bible translations that he had made. So she took a clay and a mortar type mix and sealed them in that, making like a hard rock. And she took that to Scarface, and she told him that it was her husband's favorite pillow. She had whispered earlier to Adoniram what she was going to do, and he let Adoniram have that pillow. And shortly after that, the Burmese government needed Adoniram to do some translations so they could make friends with Britain, so they let him out. Shortly after they let him out, Anne died, and he hand dug a grave, and shortly later her son died just a few days later, and he buried them both together and built a hut out there by their graves. He was heard one time crying out, God is to me the great unknown. He says, I believe in him, but I find him not. While he was in the prison, he lost the rock pillow. He lost the Bible translations. He was devastated. He was in deep depression. They said that someone gave him the works of Finlan and Madame Gaio during this time. He began to read them. He heard that his brother had been converted in America after years and years of being lost. And something began to stir in him of a revival in his own heart. He told later that 10,000 6,000 tracts were passed out at that time, but he only gave them to those that asked for it. He said that he had over 6,000 knocks at his door asking if he was the man that could tell them how to miss hell and find heaven. It was during this time when God was stirring revival that Malnom, the first convert that he ever had, came by the house and he said, "Oh, Missy," he said, "I've been meaning to come by." He said, I come visit you in prison and they had moved you and scar-faced. He gave me this rock. He said, "It's your favorite pillow." And there the Bible translations came back into his hands. Oh, how God sovereignly works in the life of one Adoniram Judson. His second wife was a woman by the name of Sarah Broadman. She had lost her husband in Burmese. They were both missionaries, and he had written her a little note, and he said, "Sarah, I know you're going through a great time of suffering." He said, "God has given you the cup of sorrows." He said, "Drink it all. Drink all the bitter dregs." He said, "When you get to the bottom of the cup, it is sweet there." They were married for 11 years, and she bore him 8 children, and 3 of those children passed away. Sarah and Adoniram's health had begun to fail them. They felt inclined to take a R&R trip to the U.S. And while en route to the U.S., Sarah made the crossing, and they went on a little dinghy to a little deserted island called Helena. They hand dug a grave and there buried Sarah to await the resurrection from the dead. While in America, he was only there for a short while, 6 months. He met a lady by the name of Emily. She was a children book writer. She wrote under the name of Fanny Foster. She consented to marry him and return back to Burma, India. I always wonder what in the world did he tell that girl that would incline her to go back. "Come go with me. I done buried 2 wives and a bunch of children. Come go with me and you can die together with us." Is there any among us that would consent to follow God no matter what? After about 5 years of being back, Adonir's health began to fail him. And he told Emily he thought he would take a little boat trip by ship. Maybe the air of the ocean would help him. And we're told on board that ship on April the 12th, 1850, at 4:15 in the morning, he told a fellow passenger how few there are who die so hard. There he left this world. They wrapped him in a sheet and dropped him in the Indian Ocean at 13 degrees north, 93 degrees east longitude, to there await the resurrection of the dead. 3 years later, Emily died of tuberculosis. They gave so much according to the world standards, yet they received so little. Corn seed fall in the ground and it die, it'll bear much fruit. His Bible translations, his dictionaries are still being used today. 3,700 Baptist churches lay claim that Adoniram Judson started them. They had their roots. Several years ago, I was at the Hyatt Regency. Our son gave us a trip there, and a dear man took our bags up to the room, and I could tell that he was not from here. And I asked him where he was from, and he said, "I'm from Burma, India." And I said, "What are you here for?" He said, "I'm studying for the ministry." He said, "I'm a Baptist preacher." I asked him if he'd ever heard of Adoniram Judson. His face lit up. He said, "Adoniram Judson started the church where I was saved, married, and called to preach. Adoniram Judson still clipping coupons after so many years." Well, it's been a joy to have you on the broadcast today. Remind you of the study website, tomgillum.com. Come and visit there with us and study the Word of God together.